A crowd says the impossible happened. A witness swears the laws of nature were suspended. A sacred story asks you to believe that the universe briefly broke its own pattern because someone said it did. David Hume looked at that moment and asked a devastating question. Is it more reasonable to believe that nature was overturned, or that human testimony is fragile, emotional, mistaken, exaggerated, or deceived? What kind of evidence would actually be strong enough to justify believing in a miracle? That question sounds simple. It is not. It sits at the center of one of the oldest and most unresolved tensions in the philosophy of religion. And most people who grew up inside a tradition of miracle belief were never invited to ask it seriously. They were handed the stories, handed the reverence, and told that doubt was the problem. But the question does not go away simply because it is inconvenient. If a miracle is, by definition, a violation of the established order of nature, then the evidence required to believe it happened must be extraordinary. And that raises the uncomfortable possibility that no testimony, however sincere, however repeated, however ancient, might be sufficient on its own to carry that weight. This is not a question designed to wound believers. It is a question designed to test the intellectual structure beneath the belief. Because if the belief survives honest examination, it emerges stronger. And if it does not survive honest examination, then what was being protected was never truth, but comfort. The tension between hope and evidence is not a modern invention. It has been alive in the human mind for as long as sacred stories have been told. What Hume gave us was a precise instrument for measuring that tension. David Hume was an 18th century Scottish philosopher, and he is remembered as one of the most penetrating and careful thinkers in the history of Western philosophy. He was not a man who shouted at religion from the streets. He was a man who sat down, thought rigorously, and followed an argument wherever it led, even when it led somewhere that made the powerful deeply uncomfortable. His approach was empirical, meaning he believed that genuine knowledge must be grounded in observation and experience, not in authority, not in tradition, and not in the emotional intensity of a crowd claiming the impossible. In his famous philosophical work titled An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, published in 1748, Hume dedicated a section specifically to miracles, and what he wrote there has never been successfully refuted, only disputed. What makes Hume the ideal lens for this investigation is precisely his calm. He did not rage against religion. He applied a standard. His standard was simple. A wise person proportions their belief to the evidence available, not to the authority of the person making the claim, not to the age of the story, not to the emotional weight of the tradition surrounding it, to the evidence. And when he applied that standard to miracle claims, the results were unsettling in ways that institutional religion has struggled with ever since. He is our guide into this investigation, not because he hated faith, but because he respected evidence more than he feared what the evidence might reveal. For billions of people across thousands of years, miracles have not been curiosities or metaphors. They have been the very foundations on which religious authority rests. A miracle, in the traditional theological sense, is an event that cannot be explained by the natural order of things because it was caused directly by divine power stepping into the ordinary world and suspending its ordinary rules. Water does not become wine by natural process. The dead do not rise by any mechanism known to biology. Bread does not multiply in a basket through any chemistry available to human understanding. Yet these stories are told as historical events, as literal interventions by a divine being who chose specific moments to reveal himself through an undeniable rupture in the fabric of normal cause and effect. This is not a peripheral feature of most major religious traditions. It is a central one. In Christianity, the miracle is not decorative. The resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth is presented as the cornerstone of the entire theological structure. The Apostle Paul wrote in his letter to the Corinthians that if the resurrection did not happen, then Christian faith is empty, and believers are to be pitied above all others. That is an extraordinary claim to place at the center of a religion, and it is an extraordinary acknowledgement of just how much depends on a miracle being historically real rather than symbolically meaningful. The healing of the blind, the walking on water, the feeding of the multitudes, the raising of Lazarus from the tomb. All of these are presented not as poetry, but as recorded fact. Fact that is supposed to demonstrate divine identity and authorize the teachings that follow. And this pattern does not belong only to Christianity. Moses parts the Red Sea. The prophet Elijah calls fire down from heaven. Muhammad receives revelation in a cave, and the Quran itself is presented as a miraculous text incapable of human imitation. The Buddha's birth is attended by supernatural signs. Sacred traditions across the globe have built their authority, in part, on the claim that the natural world does not contain its own complete explanation, and that extraordinary interventions from beyond nature have occurred and have been witnessed. The miracle is the signature of the divine. It is the moment when heaven touches earth and leaves a mark that human beings are supposed to carry forward as testimony. To understand why miracle belief persists with such emotional force, you have to understand what miracles offer to ordinary human beings living inside ordinary human suffering. A miracle that behind the laws of nature, behind the randomness of illness and accident and death, there is a personal intelligence that sees, that cares, and that can act. When a mother prays over a dying child, and the child recovers in a way the doctors cannot explain, the miracle is not an abstract philosophical proposition. It is a flood of relief and gratitude, and the terrifying and beautiful sense that something beyond the visible world loves that child. That experience is real, even if the explanation for it remains genuinely uncertain. And dismissing the emotion does nothing to answer the evidence question. Miracle stories also bind communities together in ways that are psychologically profound. Shared sacred memory creates solidarity. When a congregation repeats the story of a healing, or a resurrection, or a divine intervention, they are not merely rehearsing historical data. They are reinforcing the shared identity that makes them a community rather than a collection of strangers. The story of what God did is also the story of who we are. This is why miracle accounts appear at the founding moments of nearly every major religious tradition. They are the narrative events that distinguish this community from all others, that mark this group as chosen, witnessed, accompanied. The sacred story is also the social glue, and pulling on it risks not just a theological disruption, but a communal one. There is also the dimension of desperate human need. Miracles are most intensely believed in places and moments of extreme suffering. In ancient communities without modern medicine, where death arrived without warning and without remedy, the idea that divine power could intervene was not a luxury of spiritual imagination. It was a survival mechanism of the soul. When every human remedy fails, the appeal to something beyond human remedy becomes the last available hope. And hope is not a weakness. It is a fundamental feature of what it means to be a conscious being aware of its own mortality. Miracle belief does not thrive in spite of suffering. It thrives because of it. That is not a flaw in ordinary believers. It is a testimony to the depth of human need that sacred stories have always tried to address. But here is where the structure begins to tremble. Almost no one alive today has witnessed a miracle directly. Almost everyone who believes in a specific miracle believes in it because someone else said it happened. A text reports it. A tradition preserves it. A community repeats it. A religious authority vouches for it. The belief rests not on personal observation, but on testimony. And testimony is the first place Hume plants his lens. Because testimony is a human product, and human beings are fallible in ways that are not random. They are fallible in specific, consistent, documentable patterns. They misremember. They exaggerate. They interpret ambiguous events through the filter of their existing beliefs. They feel social pressure to confirm what their community expects them to confirm. They desire meaning so intensely that they sometimes perceive meaning where the evidence does not clearly place it. This does not mean that every witness is a liar. Hume was too careful a thinker to make that crude argument. A witness can be completely sincere and still be wrong. A community can transmit a story with complete devotion and still be transmitting something that began as misperception, exaggeration, or pious embellishment, rather than literal historical fact. The crack in miracle belief is not that believers are stupid or dishonest. The crack is that the structure of the belief rests on human testimony, and human testimony has a known and measurable failure rate, especially when the event being reported is emotionally overwhelming, socially charged, and already surrounded by an existing framework of expectation. When a person already believes that God performs miracles, they are already primed to interpret ambiguous events as miraculous. That is not faith. That is a confirmation pattern. If this investigation is already beginning to open something in you that you were never given permission to examine, something that has been sitting quietly beneath years of inherited belief, then take a moment right now and press the like button. It is a small gesture, but it signals that this kind of serious examination matters to you, that you believe the questions believers were never encouraged to ask deserve real answers rather than silence. The investigation is just beginning, and the machinery behind the miracle claim runs far deeper than the testimony of a single witness or a single ancient text. To understand miracle claims, you have to understand the world in which they were born. The ancient Mediterranean world, the world in which the foundational miracle stories of Christianity were first told, was not a world that drew a sharp line between the natural and the supernatural. That distinction is largely a product of modern scientific thinking. In the ancient world, divine beings intervened in human affairs constantly. Gods caused storms. Demons caused illness. Sacred sites produced healings. The boundary between what we would call the physical and what we would call the spiritual was permeable in every direction, and most people simply assumed that the invisible world was constantly pressing against the visible one. This was not ignorance. It was the dominant cosmological framework within which all experience was interpreted. In this environment, claims of miraculous healing were abundant and competitive. The god Asclepius, worshipped across the Greek and Roman world, was celebrated for producing miraculous healings at his temples. Pilgrims traveled from across the Mediterranean to sleep in sacred precincts and receive divine healing in their dreams. Testimonials of cures were inscribed on stone tablets and displayed publicly. This was not a fringe practice. It was a major institution of ancient religious life, complete with priests, rituals, records, and devoted communities. When the early Christians began proclaiming that Jesus healed the blind and raised the dead, They were making claims in a world already saturated with competing miracle claims from dozens of other traditions. Sacred healers and divine men, the type of figure the Greek world called a theos aner, were a recognized and expected category of person in the ancient world. Philosophers like Apollonius of Tyana were credited with miracles that closely parallel the gospel accounts, including raising the dead and performing healings. Pythagoras was said to have been in two places at once. Vespasian, the Roman emperor, was reported to have healed a blind man and a man with a withered hand, accounts preserved by the Roman historian Tacitus, a writer generally considered sober and credible. Miracle accounts were the expected currency of sacred authority. To claim religious significance in the ancient world was, in most traditions, to claim miraculous power. This context is not designed to destroy the specific claims of any tradition. It is designed to restore the frame in which those claims were made. When you read a miracle story from the ancient world without this context, it appears as a singular, unprecedented rupture in normal experience. When you restore the context, it appears as part of a dense and competitive landscape of sacred authority claims, in which the miraculous was the expected evidence that one's chosen tradition was the correct one. This does not automatically make every ancient miracle claim false, but it does mean that the presence of a miracle story in a sacred text is not itself evidence that a miracle occurred, because miracle stories were being produced across dozens of traditions simultaneously, most of which cannot all be reporting accurate history. Oral transmission also matters enormously in this context. The stories of Jesus' miracles were not written down immediately. The Gospels were composed roughly 40 to 70 years after the events they describe, during which time the stories circulated by word of mouth in communities that already believed Jesus was divine. This is exactly the environment in which sacred legends develop. It is not cynicism to observe that. It is an application of what historians know about how oral tradition works. Stories grow, details sharpen. The remarkable becomes more remarkable in the retelling. Ambiguous events acquire definitive, miraculous interpretations. Communities that need the story to be true develop powerful, unconscious mechanisms to protect it from challenge. Miracle claims do not exist in a social vacuum. They have always served specific social functions for specific groups who needed the authority that miraculous endorsement provides. The most obvious function is validation. If your prophet performs miracles, then your prophet is divinely authorized. If your saint performs miracles, then your saint is in special proximity to God. If your church is the institution through which miraculous power flows, then your church has a claim on the spiritual lives of everyone within its reach. This is not a conspiracy. It is the natural grammar of sacred authority in pre-modern cultures, where the ability to channel divine power was the primary criterion for religious legitimacy. The early church understood this deeply. The accounts of apostolic miracles preserved in the book of Acts are not incidental to the theological argument of that text. They are its argument. Peter heals a lame man at the temple gate. Paul raises a young man from the dead. The apostles perform signs and wonders that cause thousands to convert. These miracle accounts function as divine endorsements of the new movement, proof that the same power that worked through Jesus was now working through his authorized representatives. The miraculous succession was the evidence that the church was not simply a human institution, but a divinely appointed one. This pattern continued with extraordinary consistency through the centuries of Christian institutional development. Saints were venerated in part because of the miracles attributed to them during life, and crucially, after death through the agency of their relics. The bones, the garments, the The objects associated with holy persons were believed to carry miraculous power, and pilgrimages to sacred sites holding such relics became major social and economic events in medieval Europe. The church that possessed the most powerful relics attracted the most pilgrims, the most donations, the most prestige, and the most political influence. Miracle claims were not separate from institutional power. They were one of its primary generators. Popes and councils were also known to authenticate or reject miracle claims, and the authority to make that determination was itself a form of power. To pronounce a miracle genuine was to extend sacred authority. To reject a miracle claim was to deny it. The formal process of canonization in the Catholic Church, which still exists today, requires the documentation and verification of miracles performed through the intercession of the candidate for sainthood. This means that miracle claims are not merely ancient history. They are living institutional mechanisms through which the Church continues to define who is specially connected to divine power and therefore worthy of veneration and imitation. The question of what counts as a miracle is, among other things, always also a question of who gets to decide. And beyond the institutional level, miracle belief has always served the psychological needs of communities under pressure. When a religious group is persecuted, when it is a minority, when it is facing existential threat, the conviction that God has intervened miraculously on its behalf is a source of endurance and solidarity that is almost impossible to replace with anything else. The stories of divine rescue and miraculous deliverance function as proof that the suffering is not the final word, that the group is not abandoned, that the power on their side is greater than the power arrayed against them. This psychological function is real and important regardless of the historical accuracy of the specific stories, but it also helps explain why those stories are so difficult to examine critically from inside the tradition, because to question them is to threaten not just a belief, but a community's entire mechanism for surviving adversity. Here is the contradiction that sits at the center of miracle-based religious authority, and it is a contradiction that careful thinkers have noticed for centuries. Miracles are supposed to function as evidence for religious claims. They are supposed to prove that a divine being exists, that a particular prophet speaks for that being, that a particular doctrine is true, or that a particular institution carries divine authority. The miracle is the proof. But consider what is required in order to recognize something as a miracle in the first place. You must already have a framework that tells you what counts as divine intervention, what it looks like, what it means, and why it matters. In other words, you must already have a theology before you can read an event as miraculous. The miracle confirms the theology, but the theology defines what a miracle is. The reasoning moves in a circle. This circular structure becomes visible when you consider competing miracle traditions honestly. The ancient world was full of them. The medieval world was full of them. The modern world is still full of them. Every major religious tradition has its own catalog of miraculous events, and each tradition generally accepts its own miracle claims, while viewing the miracle claims of competing traditions with skepticism or dismissal. A devoted Catholic may believe deeply in the miracles of Lourdes, while remaining entirely unconvinced by the reported miracles of a Pentecostal faith healer. A Muslim scholar may affirm the miraculous nature of the Quran while questioning the historical resurrection. A Hindu devotee may report direct experience of miraculous divine intervention through a completely different sacred framework. They cannot all be accurate reports of the same divine power, working through the same theological truth, but they are all using the same logical structure. The miracle proves the doctrine. If miracles can validate mutually contradictory doctrines simultaneously, then they cannot be functioning as reliable evidence in the philosophical sense. Evidence, properly understood, is something that changes the probability of a hypothesis being true. But if miracle claims appear with roughly equal frequency and emotional intensity across traditions that contradict each other, then the presence of a miracle claim in one tradition does not meaningfully increase the probability that that tradition's specific doctrine is correct, any more than the presence of a political endorsement from one competing candidate proves that candidate is the best choice. The endorsements cancel each other out. The contradiction here is not trivial. It strikes directly at the evidential function that miracles are supposed to serve. There is also a deeper contradiction between the nature of miracles and the nature of the God most traditions are describing. A miracle, by definition, is a violation of natural law, a suspension of the regular order that God is said to have established. But if God established natural law as the stable, reliable framework for the universe, and if God is perfect in wisdom and design, then what does it mean for God to violate his own design? Some theologians have proposed that miracles are not violations, but completions, events made possible by a divine order that operates above ordinary natural law. But this answer, whatever its philosophical merits, also means that miracles are not detectable by the same methods we use to detect natural events. If a miracle operates by a logic beyond ordinary cause and effect, then the tools we use to evaluate ordinary cause and effect cannot confirm or deny it. And yet the miracle claim is being offered as evidence, as publicly available proof. The contradiction remains. The final layer of this contradiction involves what philosophers call special pleading. Miracle claims are typically insulated from critical examination by the very framework they are meant to support. To question whether the resurrection happened is often treated, inside Christian communities, not as a historical inquiry, but as a spiritual failure or a moral failing. To examine the miracle is to reveal your lack of faith. But if the miracle is supposed to be evidence, then it must be available for evidential examination. Evidence that cannot be questioned is not evidence. It is dogma. And when a tradition protects its central miracle claims from rational examination, by defining rational examination itself as a form of unfaithfulness, it has built a system that is, by its own design, incapable of discovering its own errors. That is not a feature of intellectual strength. It is a feature of intellectual closure. David Hume's argument about miracles appears in section 10 of his inquiry concerning human understanding, and it is one of the most precisely constructed philosophical arguments in the entire Western canon. His central principle is this: a wise person proportions their belief to the evidence, not to the age of a claim, not to the sincerity of its advocates, not to the emotional power of the story, to the evidence. And evidence, for Hume, is fundamentally about observed regularities. We know what the natural order looks like because we have accumulated an enormous body of experience about how nature behaves. Water flows downhill. The dead decompose. Wounds do not heal instantaneously. Bread does not multiply. These regularities are not just conventions. They are the accumulated testimony of every human being who has ever lived and observed the natural world. That accumulated testimony is the evidence against which miracle claims must be measured. Hume's specific formulation runs something like this: a miracle, by definition, is a violation of a law of nature. A law of nature is established by a uniform and consistent experience of human observation. When we encounter a testimony that a law of nature has been violated, we are weighing two competing evidential claims against each other. On one side is the testimony of the witnesses to the miracle, On the other side is the entire accumulated human experience that the law of nature holds without exception. Hume's argument is that the accumulated experience always outweighs the testimony of any finite number of witnesses, because the law of nature is built from a vastly larger body of testimony than any single miracle account can produce. The wise person, therefore, always has stronger evidence against the miracle than for it. This is sometimes misread as Hume saying that miracles are impossible. That is not what he said, and the distinction matters. Hume was not making a metaphysical claim that a divine being could not, in principle, interrupt the natural order. He was making an epistemological claim about what rational belief requires given the evidence available to us. Even if miracles are possible in principle, the evidence we have for any specific miracle claim will almost always be weaker than the evidence we have for the natural regularity that the claimed miracle would have violated. The question is never simply whether something could have happened. The question is what the evidence best supports. Hume also introduced what has become one of the most discussed principles in the philosophy of religion, often summarized in the phrase that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This phrase captures the asymmetry at the heart of his argument. An ordinary claim that it rained in London on a given Tuesday requires only ordinary evidence. A credible witness's report is more than sufficient. But an extraordinary claim that a man rose from the dead after 3 days requires evidence proportionate to its extraordinariness, because the extraordinary claim is being made against an enormous background of natural regularity that points the other way. The weight of the required evidence rises in proportion to the degree of improbability being claimed. What made Hume's argument particularly powerful was his systematic analysis of testimony itself. He recognized that testimony is not a transparent window onto events. It is a human product shaped by memory, perception, desire, social pressure, and interpretive framework. Witnesses are not recording devices. They are human beings with prior beliefs, emotional needs, cultural expectations, and unconscious motivations. When Hume asks us to consider how much weight to give a miracle testimony, he is also asking us to consider the full range of things that can go wrong between an event and its report, even when the reporter is completely sincere. Sincerity does not guarantee accuracy, and in the case of extraordinary events, the gap between what happened and what a sincere witness believes happened can be very wide indeed. The final element of Hume's central argument is his observation about the consistent pattern of miracle claims across human history and across different cultures. Every religion has them. Every sacred tradition reports them. If miracle claims were actually reliable evidence of divine activity, then this universal distribution would be evidence for a God who intervenes constantly and everywhere. But when you look at the specific content of those miracle claims, they consistently support the particular theological doctrines of the communities producing them. Christian miracles confirm Christian doctrine. Islamic miracles confirm Islamic doctrine. The miracles of competing traditions cannot all be accurate reports of the same divine reality if those traditions contradict each other on fundamental questions. This pattern suggests that miracle claims are more likely to reflect the belief structures of the communities producing them than to record objective supernatural interventions. Now, take Hume's lens and hold it directly against the miracle claims of the Christian tradition, which are the most familiar to the majority of the audience likely watching this investigation. The resurrection of Jesus is the central case. What does Hume's analysis reveal? First, consider the natural regularity against which the claim is being made. Human beings who have been dead for 3 days do not return to life. This is not simply a scientific observation. It is the accumulated testimony of every human being across all of recorded history, confirmed by every culture, every civilization, every medical tradition, every forensic investigation ever conducted. The probability assigned to a man rising from the dead after 3 days on the basis of natural observation alone is vanishingly small, not logically impossible, but at the extreme edge of improbability given everything we know about biology and death. Against that vast weight of natural regularity, what evidence do we have for the resurrection specifically? We have written accounts composed several decades after the claimed event, in a culture that already believed Jesus was divine, transmitted through communities with profound theological investment in the story being true. We have no contemporary Roman records of the event. We have no independent non-Christian sources from the 1st century that confirm it happened. The earliest written account of the resurrection in Christian scripture, Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, was composed roughly 20 years after the claimed event and consists primarily of a list of those who claimed to have seen the risen Jesus, without any narrative description of the appearances themselves. Hume would ask, does this body of evidence outweigh the entire accumulated human experience of how death works? His answer would be clear. But Hume's analysis does not stop at the quality of the evidence. It also examines the conditions under which testimony is produced. The early Christian witnesses to the resurrection were not neutral observers. They were people who had followed Jesus with intense emotional commitment, who experienced his death as a shattering catastrophe, and who were embedded in a tradition that had prophesied a coming figure whose vindication by God was expected. The psychological conditions for sincere but mistaken testimony were fully present. Grief, desire, expectation, community pressure, and the need for the story to have a different ending than the one the cross provided. None of this proves the resurrection did not happen. But Hume would note that these conditions make it very difficult to use the testimony as clean, uncontaminated evidence. The same analysis applies to the healing miracles. When Jesus heals the blind or the lame, the accounts are recorded in texts written by communities who already believed he was divine. The accounts cannot be cross-checked against contemporary medical records because no such records exist. The claims about healing are presented without any mechanism for evaluation, and the conditions under which such healings are most frequently reported, religious excitement, communal expectation, the psychological intensity of encounter with a charismatic figure, are precisely the conditions in which psychosomatic effects, misdiagnosis, and wishful interpretation are most likely to be operating. Again, none of this constitutes proof that the healings did not occur, but it does mean that the testimony alone, produced under these specific conditions, cannot carry the evidential weight that doctrinal tradition has asked it to carry. Hume also invites us to consider what we might call the competition problem. Christianity is not the only tradition reporting miraculous healings and resurrections. The ancient world was populated with sacred healers. The medieval world produced an enormous catalog of saintly miracles, many of which were officially authenticated by church authority, and many of which subsequent scholarship has found very difficult to take at face value. If we are willing to apply rigorous scrutiny to the miracle claims of traditions other than our own, honesty demands that we apply the same scrutiny to the miracle claims of our own tradition. The standard cannot shift based on which tradition we were born into without abandoning intellectual integrity entirely. And then there is the question of religious bias, which Hume identifies as one of the most significant factors distorting miracle testimony. A committed believer has a powerful unconscious motivation to interpret ambiguous evidence as miraculous. This is not deception. It is the natural operation of a mind already organized around a sacred framework. When something unexpected and positive happens, a believer within a miracle-affirming tradition will naturally interpret it as divine intervention. When something unexpected and negative happens, the same believer will often interpret it as divine testing or divine mystery. The framework is, by its design, nearly unfalsifiable from inside it, and testimony produced from inside an unfalsifiable framework is, by Hume's standard, testimony that must be treated with significant caution. The most dangerous implication of Hume's analysis is not simply that specific miracle claims fail the evidential test. The most dangerous implication is what it suggests about the relationship between human psychology and religious narrative. If miracle claims reliably appear in every religious tradition, if they consistently support the specific doctrines of the communities producing them, if they are produced under conditions of emotional intensity, communal expectation, and prior belief, and if they cannot withstand the same evidential scrutiny we apply to other historical claims, then the most parsimonious explanation for their existence is not divine activity. It is human meaning-making. Human beings, confronted with suffering, death, uncertainty, and the desire for a universe that responds to prayer, produce sacred narratives that include miraculous events, because those events do the emotional and social work that needs doing. This does not mean that the experiences underlying miracle claims are not real. Something real happens when a person in desperate prayer experiences what feels like divine presence. Something real happens when a community gathers around a story of divine rescue and finds the strength to endure persecution. The experiences are genuine. The question Hume forces us to ask is whether the supernatural interpretation of those genuine experiences is the most reasonable interpretation available, or whether it is one possible interpretation among several, selected because it fits the existing sacred framework rather than because the evidence independently demands it. The implication becomes dangerous to institutional religion, specifically because miracle claims are not peripheral to most religious traditions. They are foundational. If the resurrection is not a historical miracle but a sacred narrative produced by the grief and hope of the early Christian community, then the entire doctrinal structure built on the resurrection as historical fact is built on a foundation that has shifted. If the miracles of the saints are not divine endorsements of the Church's authority, but products of communal devotion, psychological need, and institutional management of religious imagination, then the Church's claim to uniquely channel divine power becomes significantly harder to defend. Hume does not have to say that God does not exist in order to create this problem. He only has to apply a consistent standard of evidence, and the standard alone is enough to destabilize the architecture. There is also a deeper implication about the nature of religious authority itself. If miraculous endorsement is the primary evidence that a prophet speaks for God, and if Hume's analysis reveals that miraculous endorsement cannot carry that evidential weight, then on what basis does religious authority rest? The honest answer, which institutions have generally preferred not to give, is that religious authority rests largely on tradition, social structure, and the psychological power of sacred narratives, rather than on independently verifiable supernatural endorsement. That is not nothing. Tradition and social structure are real and powerful forces in human life, but they are human forces, and an authority that is fundamentally human in its origin, but claims to be divine in its mandate, is not an authority that deserves the absolute obedience it typically demands. The implication extends into the domain of moral authority as well. When religious institutions ground their moral commands in miraculous divine revelation, they are claiming an authority that places their moral judgments beyond ordinary human evaluation. God commanded it. The miracle proves God commanded it. Therefore, the moral command is not subject to question or revision by human reason. This structure has historically been used to enforce extraordinary suffering, from the condemnation of scientific discoveries to the persecution of those who fell outside the boundaries of orthodox identity. If the miracle that grounds the divine authorization of the moral command cannot survive evidential scrutiny, then the moral command is reduced from divine law to human tradition. That reduction matters enormously because human traditions can be revised, challenged, and improved. Divine laws, as they are presented within this structure, cannot. Finally, there is the implication for the viewer sitting with this investigation right now. If you were raised in a tradition where miracles were presented as historical facts that you were required to accept as the basis of your faith, then Hume's analysis reveals something important about what was being asked of you. You were being asked to accept extraordinary claims on the basis of testimony produced under specific historical and psychological conditions without being invited to apply the kind of scrutiny those claims actually require. The demand was not intellectual, but obediential. Believe because the tradition says it happened. Question the questioning, not the claim. Hume suggests that this is precisely backwards. The claim, not the questioning, is what requires justification, and that inversion is what makes his argument genuinely dangerous to dogma, because it places the burden of proof exactly where intellectual honesty requires it to be placed. Miracle belief has never been simply a private matter of personal spirituality. It has always had a public, institutional, and political life that served very specific and very practical functions for those who managed its production and authentication. The most obvious function was the consolidation of authority. A leader, whether prophet, apostle, bishop, or pope, who could perform or channel miraculous power, was a leader who possessed a form of authority that could not easily be challenged by ordinary political or rational means. Miraculous authority claimed a source beyond human contestation. To challenge it was not merely to disagree with a policy. It was to oppose God. That is a remarkably effective way to insulate power from accountability. The medieval cult of relics illustrates this function with extraordinary clarity. Relics, the bones, teeth, blood, and garments of saints, were believed to carry miraculous power, and the institutions that possessed them became centers of pilgrimage, wealth, and influence. Churches competed intensely for the most prestigious relics. Cities whose cathedral possessed a particularly powerful relic attracted pilgrims from across Europe, and pilgrims brought money. The miracle-working relic was, among other things, an economic engine, and the Church's authority to authenticate the miraculous power of a relic, to declare it genuine or fraudulent, was simultaneously an authority to direct that economic and devotional energy. The management of miracle claims was, in practice, the management of institutional power. The use of miracle claims to validate new religious movements is equally well documented. When a new sect or reform movement emerged within a religious tradition, its leaders typically sought miraculous endorsement to establish their legitimacy. The stories of miracles surrounding Francis of Assisi were crucial to the legitimization of the Franciscan movement. The miraculous experiences attributed to Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross were central to the reform of Carmelite spirituality. In the Protestant Reformation, The contested question of whether miracles still occurred, and if so, through whom, was not merely a theological debate. It was a battle over whose authority God was endorsing. The miracle was always also a political argument. In the contemporary world, miracle claims continue to serve institutional functions in ways that Hume would recognize immediately. Healing ministries attract enormous followings and generate substantial financial resources. Charismatic leaders who claim miraculous gifts of healing, prophecy, or divine knowledge exercise authority over communities that extend that authority precisely because of its claimed supernatural origin. When a congregation believes that their pastor has a direct miraculous connection to God, they are less likely to question that pastor's decisions, less likely to seek external accountability, and more likely to give financially and personally in ways that serve the institution. The miracle claim is not incidental to these dynamics. It is their mechanism, and perhaps most subtly, miracle belief serves the function of maintaining the plausibility of the entire sacred worldview against the pressure of a secular, empirically oriented culture. In a world where natural explanation increasingly covers phenomena that previous generations attributed to divine intervention, the miracle becomes increasingly important as proof that the natural world does not exhaust reality. The miracle is the evidence that God is still here, still active, still capable of breaking through. Without it, the divine can begin to feel like a philosophical abstraction rather than a personal presence. The institutional investment in maintaining miracle belief is therefore also an investment in maintaining the psychological reality of the sacred in a world that increasingly explains itself by other means. The psychological effect of miracle belief on the individual is complex, contradictory, and deeply human. On one side of the ledger, miracle belief offers extraordinary comfort. The conviction that a divine power can intervene in natural processes means that no situation is truly hopeless. Prayer becomes not merely an act of submission, but an act of genuine petition to a power capable of response. When a person believes that God has performed a miracle on their behalf, the psychological effect is profound relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of being personally known and cared for by the source of all things. This is not a trivial psychological gift. For a human being facing illness, loss, or despair, the felt sense of divine accompaniment is a resource of extraordinary power. But miracle belief also generates its own forms of psychological burden that are less frequently acknowledged from inside the tradition. If God performs miracles for some, then the question of why God does not perform miracles for others becomes a source of profound anguish. Why was my child healed and not yours? Why did the miracle come for this congregation and not for that one? The framework that offers hope to some simultaneously produces guilt, confusion, and spiritual shame in others. The person whose prayer for healing goes unanswered is left to wonder whether their faith was insufficient, whether their sin blocked the miracle, whether God judged them unworthy. The theological explanations offered for why miracles do not always come are often more damaging than helpful because they locate the failure inside the believer rather than inside the promise. There is also the psychological dynamic of miracle expectation and its relationship to critical thinking. A community that frames miraculous interpretation as the mark of true faith and skeptical questioning as the mark of spiritual failure has created a psychological environment in which the ordinary human impulse to evaluate evidence is coded as dangerous. The believer who begins to doubt whether a claimed healing was actually miraculous, who notices that the evidence is thin, who asks the Humean questions about the quality of the testimony, experiences not intellectual clarification, but spiritual anxiety. The doubt feels like a symptom of spiritual disease rather than a sign of intellectual health. This psychological framing effectively suppresses the very cognitive process that might otherwise evaluate the claims more accurately. The desire to see meaning in suffering is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, and miracle belief channels that desire in ways that can be both beautiful and harmful. Beautiful because the framework of divine providence genuinely helps some people bear unbearable losses by placing them within a story of ultimate meaning. Harmful because the same framework can prevent people from accurately assessing their situations, from seeking natural remedies when supernatural ones are expected instead, or from holding institutions accountable for preventable harms when those harms are interpreted as divine testing rather than institutional failure. When a congregation is taught to interpret all suffering as divine purpose and all relief as divine miracle, the space for ordinary human accountability shrinks dramatically. Finally, miracle belief creates a dependency structure that Hume's analysis helps to clarify. If miracles are the primary evidence of divine presence and divine approval, and if the authentication of miracles is controlled by religious institutions, then the ordinary believer's access to the divine is mediated by institutional authority in a way that maintains dependence rather than fostering spiritual maturity. You cannot evaluate the miracle yourself because you do not have access to the standards. You cannot question the authority because the authority's miraculous endorsement is what makes it authoritative. The structure closes around the believer, and what closes around them is not just a belief system, but a psychological environment in which doubt is coded as danger and trust in authority is coded as the highest virtue. Hume's argument is, among other things, an argument for the intellectual independence that such structures systematically erode. Let us pause for a moment and take stock of how far this investigation has traveled. We began with a crowd claiming the impossible. We discovered a world in which such claims were the normal currency of sacred authority, produced under conditions of emotional intensity, communal expectation, and institutional interest. We met David Hume, who provided a precise philosophical instrument for examining those claims. The principle that a wise person proportions belief to evidence, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We watched that instrument move across the landscape of miracle belief and reveal the circular reasoning, the competitive claim problem, the psychological conditions distorting testimony, and the institutional uses that give miracle belief its remarkable persistence. And we have seen how the psychological architecture of miracle belief can both comfort and constrain the individual soul in ways that serve institutional power as much as personal transformation. What Hume accomplished with his argument was a fundamental reorientation of the question. Before Hume, the standard debate about miracles was often framed as a contest between faith and unfaith, between the pious and the impious, between those who trusted God and those who trusted themselves. Hume reframed it as a question about evidence, not about whether you were a good person or a faithful one, about whether the evidence available to you was proportionate to the belief you were being asked to hold. That reframing was radical because it removed the moral charge from the act of questioning. Doubt was no longer infidelity, it was epistemological honesty. And that shift changed everything about how the conversation could proceed. The sacred stories that carry miracle claims are not simply theological propositions. They are the emotional architecture of entire civilizations. They carry the grief and hope of generations. They encode the community's understanding of who it is and why it matters. Hume's analysis does not ask us to destroy that architecture. It asks us to be honest about what it is made of. If it is made of divine revelation, then the evidence for that should be able to withstand serious examination. And if it cannot withstand serious examination, then what we are dealing with is not divine revelation, but human meaning-making of extraordinary power and extraordinary consequence. Both of those things deserve to be understood clearly. This is the kind of investigation that the heretic lens exists to conduct, not to mock what billions of people have found sacred, but to bring the philosophical and historical instruments that serious thought requires to the questions that religious authority has too often placed beyond reach. If that promise resonates with you, if you want to explore more of the forbidden history, the buried philosophy, and the dangerous questions that organized religion has worked very hard to keep outside the circle of respectful conversation, then subscribe to this channel right now. Every video is another file opened from an archive that was never supposed to be public, and the investigation you are watching right now is far from finished. What has been established so far is the foundation, the world of miracle claims, the psychological and institutional machinery that sustains them, and the philosophical standard that Hume introduces. What comes next is the direct confrontation between Hume's argument and the strongest available defenses of miracle belief, because a genuine investigation does not only present one side, it tests the argument against the strongest resistance it can find, and then it follows the evidence to wherever it honestly leads. The intellectual case that Hume builds against miracle belief rests on several interlocking lines of reasoning, and it is worth organizing them clearly so that their cumulative weight can be felt rather than each dismissed individually. The first and most fundamental line is the argument from natural regularity. The laws of nature, as we understand them, represent the most thoroughly tested body of evidence humanity has ever assembled. Every observation ever recorded, every experiment ever conducted, every experience every human being has ever had of the physical world contributes to the background probability against which any specific claim is measured. When a miracle claim asks us to believe that a law of nature was suspended in a specific instance, it is asking us to outweigh that entire accumulated record with the testimony of a small number of witnesses operating in specific emotional and cultural conditions. The disproportion between the evidence for natural regularity and the evidence for any particular miracle is, Hume argues, always enormous. The second line of reasoning concerns the inherent weakness and fallibility of testimony. Hume was one of the first thinkers to analyze testimony systematically as an evidential category, rather than simply accepting it at face value. He identified several factors that consistently reduce the reliability of testimony: the small number of witnesses relative to the extraordinary nature of the claim, the absence of witnesses with no emotional or institutional stake in the outcome, the conditions of psychological intensity in which miracle testimonies are typically produced, and the well-documented human tendency to embellish, misremember, and interpret ambiguous experiences through the filter of prior belief. None of these factors prove any particular testimony is false, but they do reduce the evidentiary value of the testimony to a level that cannot, in Hume's analysis, outweigh the natural regularity it is being offered to contradict. The third line of reasoning is what might be called the religious bias argument. Hume observed that miracle claims appear overwhelmingly in religious contexts among people who already believe in the kind of divine being that performs miracles. This is not a coincidence. A person who already believes that God intervenes in nature is cognitively primed to interpret ambiguous events as miraculous. A person who does not hold that prior belief will interpret the same ambiguous event through a different framework. The point is not that believers are less intelligent. The point is that prior belief shapes perception in ways that make testimony from believers about miraculous events significantly less useful as independent evidence for those events. It is the equivalent of asking a partisan audience to evaluate whether their preferred candidate performed well in a debate. Their testimony is sincere, but not independent. The fourth line of reasoning is the competing miracles argument, which Hume considered one of his most powerful. Every religious tradition reports miracles. The miracles of different traditions routinely contradict each other in their theological implications, since the miracle of one tradition typically confirms the doctrine that contradicts the doctrine of another. If miracle testimony is reliable evidence of divine activity, then we must accept a version of divine activity that simultaneously endorses mutually contradictory theological positions. But a perfect and consistent divine being cannot simultaneously endorse contradictory claims. Therefore, either most miracle testimonies are unreliable, or the competing miracle claims are not what they appear to be. Either conclusion reduces the evidentiary value of any specific miracle claim, because you cannot privilege your tradition's miracles over another tradition's miracles without applying an external standard, and the only external standard available is the one Hume provides, which the miracles then fail. The fifth line of reasoning concerns what Hume calls the love of wonder. Human beings are psychologically predisposed to be attracted to the extraordinary. Stories of the miraculous spread faster, are remembered more vividly, are retold with greater enthusiasm, and accumulate more embellishment over time than ordinary stories. This is not a moral failing. It is a feature of human cognition. We are pattern-seeking, meaning-hungry, wonder-prone creatures, and the miraculous story satisfies all three of those deep psychological needs simultaneously. Hume's point is that this predisposition means that miraculous stories will tend to spread and survive in human culture, even when they do not correspond to actual miraculous events, because they are exactly the kind of story that human minds are most likely to pass on. The cultural fitness of a miraculous story is therefore not evidence of its historical accuracy. It may be evidence precisely of the opposite. The sixth line draws all of these together into what Hume frames as a practical maxim for rational belief. When you encounter a miracle claim, the honest epistemic procedure is not to ask simply whether you can imagine a world in which it might be true. Of course you can. The procedure is to compare the probability of the event claimed against the probability of the alternative explanation, which in most cases is that the testimony is in some way mistaken, embellished, or misinterpreted. And in the case of extraordinary miracle claims, the probability of some form of testimonial failure is, given everything Hume has marshaled, far greater than the probability of the natural order having been actually suspended. This is not a bias against God. It is a bias toward the more probable explanation, which is exactly what honest reasoning requires. Hume's argument does not go unanswered, and intellectual honesty demands that the strongest responses to it be presented with the same seriousness that his argument deserves. The most powerful objection begins with a theological premise that Hume's argument does not and cannot refute on its own terms. If God exists, then miracles are possible. This is not a circular claim. It is a deductive consequence of what theism means. A God who created the universe and established its natural laws is not bound by those laws the way a creature within the universe is bound by them. The author of a story can intervene in the narrative. The architect of a building can modify its structure. If the divine being posited by most theistic traditions is real, then the laws of nature are not constraints on that being, but expressions of its will, and they can be set aside whenever that being chooses. Hume's argument about natural regularity does not refute divine possibility. It only speaks to what we should expect given our ordinary experience. The second major defense concerns the quality and character of specific testimonies. Hume's analysis of testimony tends toward the general, cataloging the conditions under which human testimony fails. But defenders of miracle claims argue that specific testimonies can be evaluated on their own terms and found to be credible in ways that Hume's general analysis does not adequately accommodate. The early Christian witnesses to the resurrection, for example, are often cited as examples of testimony with unusual credibility markers. They were not reporting a pleasant or flattering experience. They were reporting something that disrupted their own prior expectations, something that cost them social standing, persecution, and in many traditional accounts, their lives. Testimony given under conditions of significant personal cost, the argument goes, carries more weight than testimony given under conditions of social reward or pressure to conform. A third defense addresses the competing miracles problem by distinguishing between the quality and context of different miracle claims rather than treating all miracle accounts as equivalent. A sophisticated defender of Christian miracle claims might argue that the resurrection account has historical features, early attestation, the rapid growth of a community staking everything on its truth, the transformation of a small persecuted group into a world-altering movement, that distinguish it qualitatively from the miracle claims of competing traditions. The argument is not that all miracle claims are equally credible. The argument is that some specific claims, examined carefully in their historical context, may deserve a different level of credibility than the general skeptical framework assigns. A fourth defense raises what might be called the experiential argument. Hume's analysis focuses almost entirely on reported historical miracles, events that someone else claims to have witnessed in the past. But a significant portion of contemporary religious experience involves what believers describe as direct personal experience of divine presence, miraculous coincidence, answered prayer, or unexplained healing. These experiences are not testimony about something that happened to someone else 2,000 years ago. They are first-person reports of something the believer claims to have experienced directly. Hume's framework struggles to engage these experiences as fully as it engages historical testimony, because the person having the experience is the witness, and their report, however unverifiable, carries a different kind of evidential weight for them than second-hand accounts do. The fifth, and perhaps most philosophically serious defense of miracle belief, is the argument that Hume's standard, consistently applied, proves too much. If we require that extraordinary claims be measured against the full weight of accumulated natural experience before we accept them, we may find ourselves committed to a philosophical position that is more restrictive than reason actually requires. Historical events in general are unique. No event in history has ever happened before, by definition, and yet we accept historical claims on the basis of testimony all the time. The argument from natural regularity, taken to its logical extreme, could be used to cast doubt on any sufficiently unusual historical claim, not just religious ones. If the standard Hume applies to miracles were applied uniformly to all historical claims, the scope of what we could rationally believe about the past would shrink dramatically. Each of these defenses deserves to be taken seriously, and each has been developed with genuine philosophical care by serious thinkers. But taking them seriously does not require concluding that Hume's problem disappears under their pressure. consider the first defense, that if God exists, miracles are possible. This is philosophically true, but evidentially unhelpful in the specific way that matters. Possibility is not the same as probability. It is possible that any number of extraordinary things happened in any given moment of history. Possibility alone does not justify belief. What justifies belief is evidence, and the claim that a miracle is possible because God exists and God could do it does not itself constitute evidence that the specific miracle in question actually occurred. The possibility argument requires us to have already established God's existence through independent means before it can do any work, and that prior establishment is exactly what is in question. The defense based on the character and cost of the witnesses is more interesting, but also faces significant difficulties when examined carefully. It is true that testimony given at personal cost is generally more credible than testimony given under social pressure to conform. But it is not obvious that the early Christian witnesses were reporting what we would call a literal physical resurrection based on clear observation. The nature of the resurrection appearances in the earliest accounts, Paul's letter describing a form of seeing that Paul himself experienced on the road to Damascus, which was a visionary or experiential phenomenon rather than a conventional physical encounter, raises genuine questions about what kind of experience was actually being reported. Sincerity about a visionary experience is not the same as reliable testimony about a physical event. The cost paid by the witnesses does not resolve the ambiguity about what the witnesses actually witnessed. The historical distinctiveness argument about the resurrection faces the difficulty that the features it identifies as distinguishing are themselves subject to the same historical and evidential questions that the argument is meant to answer. The rapid spread of early Christianity, the transformation of the movement after the crucifixion, these are real historical phenomena that require explanation. But there are explanations available that do not require a physical resurrection, including the powerful psychological and social dynamics of a grief-transformed community, with strong reasons to maintain the hope that their movement was not finished. The historical argument does not prove the natural explanation is correct, but it does mean that the historical distinctiveness of early Christianity is not itself proof of the resurrection, because the same historical data can be organized under more than one explanatory hypothesis. The experiential argument, the appeal to direct first-person experience of the miraculous, is genuinely the hardest case for Hume's framework to address. Hume himself acknowledged that the direct testimony of one's own experience carries a different kind of weight than second-hand historical testimony. But even here, the problem of interpretation persists. The experience of feeling divine presence, of feeling that a prayer was answered, of feeling that something beyond the ordinary is at work, these are genuine experiences. What is not obvious is that the supernatural interpretation of those experiences is the most accurate one available. The psychology of religious experience has been extensively studied, and the relationship between the felt sense of divine presence and actual divine presence is one that the experience itself cannot adjudicate. The experience is real. The interpretation requires additional justification. The final concern, that Hume's standard proves too much, is addressed by noting what makes miracle claims specifically different from other unusual historical claims. A claim about an unusual political event or an unprecedented battle is extraordinary compared to ordinary life, but it does not violate what we understand as the laws of nature. A claim about a resurrection does. The distinction between events that are historically unusual and events that are physically impossible according to our best understanding of natural law is precisely the distinction Hume is drawing. And that distinction means that the evidential standard for miracle claims is legitimately higher than the evidential standard for other historical claims. Not because miracles are specially disfavored, but because they are claiming something specifically against the strongest evidence humanity has assembled about how the physical world works. Something changes when you pass a belief through this kind of examination. Not necessarily what you believe at the end, but how you hold it and what you understand it to be. Before examination, a miracle story is often held as simple historical fact, something that happened, something that was witnessed, something that proves the divine claim attached to it. After examination, the same story becomes something more complex, and in many ways more interesting. It becomes a human artifact, shaped by time, culture, psychological need, institutional interest, and the extraordinary human capacity to construct sacred meaning from the raw material of grief, hope, and wonder. That complexity does not make the story worthless, but it does mean the story can no longer function as raw proof of anything beyond itself. The resurrection account, when examined through Hume's lens, no longer presents itself as a simple piece of historical evidence that compels acceptance on pain of irrationality. It presents itself as an account produced by a community in the grip of one of the most profound spiritual crises a community can face: the violent death of the figure around whom their entire hope was organized. What that community did with that crisis, how they interpreted it, what story they told about it, and how that story grew and spread and became the foundation of a world civilization. These are questions of extraordinary historical and human interest. And the story that emerged from that crisis is not made less meaningful by the discovery that it cannot be easily verified as literal historical fact. It is made more human, and it is in its humanity, not in spite of it, that it carries whatever truth it carries. What also changes after examination is the relationship between miracle belief and moral authority. If you believed that a particular moral command was divine law because it was delivered through a miraculously authorized prophet or institution, and if that miraculous authorization cannot survive evidential scrutiny, then the moral command is returned to the category of human tradition, and human traditions can be evaluated, contested, revised, and improved by human reason and human conscience. This is not a loss of morality. In many respects, it is the beginning of genuine moral maturity, a moral principle that can only be obeyed because God commanded it, and the miracle proves God commanded it is not a moral principle that has been genuinely understood. It is a moral principle that has been obeyed out of fear of supernatural consequence, and fear is a less stable and less admirable foundation for moral life than understanding. The competition between miracle claims from different traditions also looks different after examination. Before, the natural human tendency is to treat your own tradition's miracles as genuine and other traditions' miracles as evidence of confusion, deception, or demonic imitation. After Hume, the more honest position is that all miracle claims face the same evidential challenge, that the challenge does not privilege any particular tradition, and that the appropriate response to the universal distribution of miracle claims is not to insist that your traditions are the real ones, but to ask honestly what the universal distribution itself reveals about human beings. What it reveals is that we are creatures who produce sacred narratives about divine intervention because those narratives do profound and necessary work in our inner lives and our communities. That is a discovery about human nature, not a refutation of the divine. The final shift that examination produces concerns the relationship between wonder and evidence. Before examination, wonder and critical thought are often presented as mutually exclusive. To maintain the sense of the sacred, you must suppress the critical question. After Hume, it becomes possible to see that wonder does not require suppressed thought. The universe is genuinely astonishing. The fact that anything exists at all, that consciousness emerged from matter, that the laws of physics take the precise form that permits the existence of stars, planets, and living organisms. These are occasions for genuine wonder that do not require miracle claims to be credible. The wonder remains, but it is no longer dependent on the suspension of the critical faculty. And wonder that can survive honest examination is, in the end, far more durable than wonder that depends on a locked door. It is important to be clear about what Hume's critique does not mean, because the misreading of it in either direction causes real harm. The first misreading is that Hume's argument proves there is no God. It does not. Hume's argument is epistemological, not metaphysical. It addresses what we can rationally believe based on the evidence available to us. It does not and cannot rule out the existence of a divine being through philosophical argument. The question of whether something exists beyond the natural world that is the source or ground of that world is a genuinely open philosophical question, and serious philosophers continue to disagree about it in good faith. Hume's argument about miracles leaves that question exactly where it found it: open, contested, and beyond the reach of simple resolution. The second misreading is that Hume's critique is a contemptuous dismissal of the people who believe in miracles. It is not. The person who has prayed through the night over a dying child and felt in that darkness a presence that carried them through has had a real and important experience. The community that has gathered around a story of miraculous survival and found in that story the strength to endure extraordinary suffering has done something profoundly human and profoundly meaningful. Hume's argument does not mock those experiences. It asks only that the supernatural interpretation of those experiences not be accepted as automatically beyond examination. The experiences themselves deserve respect. The interpretive framework around them deserves honest scrutiny. Those two things can coexist without cruelty. The third misreading is that rejecting miracle belief as historically reliable evidence requires rejecting spirituality, meaning transcendence, or the possibility of the sacred altogether. This is a false dichotomy that religious institutions have often imposed in order to make the choice between faith and examination feel more catastrophic than it needs to be. You can believe deeply that there is more to reality than what our instruments currently measure. You can find the universe genuinely mysterious, morally serious, and worthy of reverence without committing yourself to the claim that a specific ancient testimony about a specific historical miracle is literally accurate. These positions are not the same, and collapsing them into each other serves the institutions that need you to believe that questioning the miracle is questioning God. The fourth misreading is that Hume's standard is simply the imposition of secular scientific materialism onto religious questions. Hume was not a materialist in the simple sense. He was an empiricist. He thought knowledge should be grounded in experience and evidence. And his standard is not hostile to religion as such. It is hostile to irrationalism in any domain, including the domain of secular belief. Hume applied the same standard of proportioning belief to evidence to political claims, metaphysical claims, and moral claims as he did to religious ones. The standard does not belong to atheism. It belongs to honest inquiry. And honest inquiry is not the enemy of the sacred. It is the enemy of the manipulation of the sacred for purposes the sacred itself cannot endorse. What becomes possible when the grip of miracle as proof is loosened? The first thing that becomes possible is intellectual honesty about what you actually find convincing and what you do not. Inside traditions where miracle belief is mandatory, where to doubt is to sin and to question is to fall, the mind develops elaborate mechanisms for suppressing its own honest responses to evidence. You become practiced at not noticing what you notice, at generating explanations for anomalies before the anomaly has time to register as a problem. When that pressure is released, when it becomes safe to think honestly about what the evidence actually suggests, the experience is often reported as both frightening and liberating. Frightening because the certainty it removes was also a kind of shelter. Liberating because honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, feels more like integrity than the practiced suppression of doubt. The second thing that becomes possible is a more mature relationship with religious tradition. A tradition that you examine honestly and choose to engage with despite its imperfections is a tradition you have made genuinely your own. It is not inherited dogma held in place by fear of eternal consequence. It is a living set of practices, stories, ethical commitments, and communal relationships that you have evaluated and found worth inhabiting on their own terms. That kind of relationship with tradition is far more resilient than one based on compulsory belief, because it does not shatter when the historical difficulties are acknowledged. You have already seen the difficulties. You have already made your choice with open eyes. The third thing that becomes possible is a more honest engagement with suffering. One of the cruelest features of miracle-based faith is what happens to believers when miracles do not come. The child dies despite the prayer. The illness does not lift. The suffering continues without visible divine intervention. Inside the framework that makes miracles the primary evidence of divine care, these outcomes require explanation, and the explanations typically locate the failure inside the person who prayed. Insufficient faith, hidden sin, divine testing, divine mystery. What Hume's examination allows is the liberation of suffering people from that framework. Suffering does not have to be explained as a divine message about the spiritual inadequacy of the sufferer. It can simply be what it is: suffering, which is real and hard, and deserves human care rather than theological explanation. The fourth thing that becomes possible is a wonder that does not require the suppression of curiosity. When the extraordinary claims of miracle traditions are examined honestly, what often remains is not emptiness, but a more expansive sense of the genuine mystery that surrounds ordinary existence. The fact that the universe is structured in a way that permits chemistry, biology, consciousness, language, music, and love is not less astonishing for being natural rather than miraculous. The fact that human beings can ask questions about their own existence, can feel the weight of mortality, can love each other through grief, can create art in the face of meaninglessness. These things do not become less remarkable when they are understood as natural rather than supernatural. The wonder is still there. It has simply been freed from the requirement that it depend on claims that cannot survive examination. The final freedom is perhaps the most important. It is the freedom to hold uncertainty without collapse. One of the deepest fears that miracle-based religion manages and exploits is the fear of not knowing. If the miracle is real, then God is real, and the universe is ordered and meaningful, and we are not alone. If the miracle fails the evidential test, then perhaps nothing is certain, and the void opens. But this is a false binary. Uncertainty is not the same as nihilism. Not knowing whether a specific ancient miracle claim is literally true does not mean knowing that the universe is empty of meaning or purpose. It means inhabiting a genuinely open question with intellectual honesty and the courage that genuine inquiry requires. And that courage, the courage to ask the question without demanding that the answer arrive on your schedule in the form your tradition pre-approved, may be the closest thing to intellectual virtue that the examined life can offer. There is a crowd somewhere in every age saying the impossible happened. There is a witness swearing that the laws of nature paused for a moment because something beyond nature reached in, and those words land now differently than they did at the beginning of this investigation. The question is no longer simply whether you believe the crowd or the witness. The question is, what kind of evidence would be strong enough to justify believing them? Whether the testimony they offer proportions to the improbability of what they claim, and whether the desire to live in a universe where nature can be suspended by love is, however beautiful, sufficient grounds for concluding that it was. David Hume did not take that question away from you. He gave it to you honestly, for the first time, without the fear attached. Now the question belongs to you. Do you think there is any form of testimony, any number of witnesses, any quality of historical evidence that could rationally overcome Hume's challenge and justify belief in a specific miracle? Or does his argument hold, no matter how moving the story, no matter how sincere the witnesses, no matter how ancient the tradition? Leave your answer in the comments below. The conversation that follows may be more important than anything said here.